A good spy should never be remembered, Evelyn Carter would later think. Unfortunately, I was remembered before I even made it through the front gate. The carriage rattled over the stone road leading to Blackwood Palace, each turn of the wheels tightening the knot in her stomach. For 3 weeks, the leaders of Silver Creek Pack had prepared her for this mission. Watch the Alpha King. Learn his weaknesses. Discover what he was hiding. They spoke of King Adrian Blackwood as if he were a storm wrapped in human skin, a ruler so powerful that neighboring packs lowered their eyes when his name was mentioned. Evelyn had imagined someone cold, someone impossible to approach, someone who would never notice a servant carrying laundry through endless palace halls. That had been the plan. Blend in, stay invisible, gather information, return home. Simple. At least, it had sounded simple when explained from the safety of a meeting room 200 miles away. The palace itself was another matter entirely. Massive white stone walls rose above the surrounding pine forests. Silver banners drifted in the morning breeze. Sunlight reflected from tall windows, making the entire structure seem less like a fortress and more like something from a fairy tale. Evelyn stepped down from the carriage clutching a forged employment letter with slightly trembling fingers. Around her, workers moved in and out through service entrances. Bakers carried sacks of flour. Gardeners pushed carts filled with fresh flowers. Stable hands hurried between buildings. Nobody paid attention to her, which was good. Being unnoticed was exactly what she wanted. Unfortunately, her first mistake happened 11 minutes later. She had somehow taken 3 wrong turns, entered a hallway she definitely should not have entered, and opened a door she absolutely should not have opened. The room beyond was enormous. Sunlight poured through tall windows. Shelves lined the walls. Maps covered a large oak table in the center. Evelyn froze. This was not a storage room. This looked important. Very important. Her pulse jumped. Maybe this was lucky. Maybe she had stumbled directly into valuable information. She carefully stepped inside. Just one quick look, she told herself. One glance. Then leave. But before she could move closer to the table, a calm voice spoke behind her. You seem lost. Every muscle in her body locked. Slowly she turned around. The man standing in the doorway was taller than anyone she had expected. Dark hair. Gray eyes. A simple black shirt rolled at the sleeves. Nothing about him looked especially royal. Yet the entire room seemed to shift around his presence. He studied her with quiet curiosity rather than suspicion. Evelyn's carefully prepared cover story vanished from her mind. I was looking for the kitchen, she blurted. The stranger blinked once. Then unexpectedly he smiled. The kitchen is on the other side of the palace. Heat rushed into her cheeks. Wonderful. She had crossed half the building in the wrong direction. Right, she muttered. That explains a lot. To her surprise, the man laughed softly. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. Just genuinely amused. First day? He asked. Evelyn nodded. Is it that obvious? Only because you're standing in my council chamber. Her heart nearly stopped. My council chamber. The words echoed through her head. She stared at him, then at the maps, then back at him. The realization landed all at once. This wasn't a palace official. This wasn't an advisor. This wasn't some random employee. Standing 3 feet away from her was Adrian Blackwood himself, the Alpha King she had traveled 200 miles to spy on. And somehow, against all odds, her mission had lasted exactly 11 minutes before she got caught. Evelyn had expected guards, interrogations, and perhaps a swift trip back to Silver Creek in complete disgrace. What she did not expect was for the Alpha King to point toward the hallway and say, "The kitchen is 2 floors down. Turn left at the grand staircase, then follow the smell of cinnamon." For a moment she simply stared at him. Adrian Blackwood looked far too amused for a man who had just caught a stranger wandering through his private council chamber. "Thank you," she managed. "You are welcome," he replied. Then, as if remembering something, he added, "Try not to accidentally discover any state secrets on your way there." Her face turned warm again. He definitely knew she had been snooping. Somehow that made the embarrassment worse. Evelyn escaped the room as quickly as dignity allowed and spent the next 10 minutes replaying the encounter in her head. The mission was already going terribly. She was supposed to be observing the king from a distance. Instead, she had introduced herself to him by getting lost. The kitchen turned out to be larger than her entire family home. Long wooden tables stretched across the room. Fresh bread cooled on racks. Copper pots hung from the ceiling. The air carried the comforting scents of butter, vanilla, and baked apples. For the first time since arriving at the palace, Evelyn felt herself relax. Food had always made sense to her. Politics did not. The head cook, a broad-shouldered woman named Martha Bennett, assigned her simple tasks without asking many questions. Chop fruit, carry trays, organize ingredients. Evelyn threw herself into the work, grateful for something she could actually accomplish. Hours passed. Servants moved in and out carrying meals to different parts of the palace. Every so often, she caught snippets of conversation about the king. Most were surprisingly ordinary. Someone mentioned that he reviewed reports before sunrise every morning. Another complained that he worked too much and forgot to eat lunch. A third claimed he personally remembered the names of nearly every palace employee. None of it matched the terrifying stories she had grown up hearing. By late afternoon, Martha handed her a small tray. "Take this upstairs." Evelyn glanced down. On the tray sat 6 golden honey cakes, still warm from the oven. The sweet aroma drifted upward immediately. "Where are they going?" she asked. Martha gave her a strange look. "The king's office." Evelyn nearly dropped the tray. Of course they were. Somehow fate had decided she needed another encounter with Adrian Blackwood on her first day. She climbed the staircase carefully. The hallway outside the king's office stood quiet and empty. Taking a steadying breath, she knocked. "Come in," a familiar voice called. She entered. Adrian sat behind a desk covered with papers and maps. Sunlight filtered through tall windows behind him, casting a warm glow across the room. Unlike their first meeting, he looked tired. Not weak, just exhausted in the way people looked when carrying responsibilities nobody else could see. He glanced up from his paperwork. "You found the kitchen." "Eventually," Evelyn admitted. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Excellent progress." She placed the tray on his desk and prepared to leave. Then something unexpected happened. Adrian reached for one of the honey cakes and held it out toward her. "You carried them all the way up here," he said. "It seems unfair that you do not get one." Evelyn blinked. For a second, she forgot every warning Silver Creek had ever given her. Every rumor. Every frightening story. All she could see was a king offering a warm honey cake with the casual kindness of an ordinary man. And against all professional judgment, she accepted it. The honey cake was still warm. Evelyn could feel the heat through the paper napkin wrapped around it as she stepped back into the hallway. For several seconds she simply stood there staring at the pastry in her hand. This was not how spies were supposed to operate. She had spent weeks preparing for coded messages, secret meetings, and hidden documents. Nobody had warned her about baked goods. The scent of honey and cinnamon followed her all the way down the staircase. By the time she reached the servants' corridor, she finally took a bite. The soft texture nearly melted in her mouth. She closed her eyes for a moment. It was probably the best thing she had ever tasted, which somehow made the situation even worse. Back in her small room that evening, Evelyn sat beside the window with a notebook balanced on her knees. Moonlight spilled across the page. This was supposed to be her first report to Silver Creek. She dipped her pen into ink and stared at the blank paper. Report on Alpha King Adrian Blackwood. The words looked simple enough. Yet when she thought about what she had seen, confusion settled over her. The stories described a ruler who inspired fear, a king obsessed with power, a man who kept everyone at a distance. Instead she had met someone who gave directions to lost servants and shared honey cakes with complete strangers. Her pen hovered above the page. Eventually she wrote, "The king appears disciplined and highly respected by palace staff." Then she stopped. That sounded too positive. She crossed it out. Started again. "The king maintains close oversight of palace operations." Better. Less suspicious. Less personal. She finished the report with vague observations and no useful discoveries before folding the paper away. Something about the entire assignment suddenly felt more complicated than it had a week ago. The following morning began before sunrise. Evelyn joined the kitchen staff preparing breakfast trays. Outside, pale gold light touched the tops of the distant pine trees. Inside, the palace slowly came to life. Servants moved through hallways. Messengers hurried between offices. Guards rotated shifts. Everyone seemed to have a purpose. Everyone except Evelyn, who was still trying to figure out how to spy on a king who insisted on behaving like a decent person. Around mid-morning, Martha sent her to deliver fresh tea to the royal library. The library occupied an entire wing of the palace. Towering shelves stretched toward the ceiling. Ladders rolled along polished wooden tracks. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting colorful patterns across the floor. Evelyn set down the tray and turned to leave. Then she noticed someone sitting alone at a table near the far window. Adrian Blackwood. He wore no crown. No ceremonial robes. Just a dark sweater and rolled sleeves. Several open books surrounded him. His attention appeared completely absorbed by whatever he was reading. Evelyn hesitated. Curiosity got the better of her. She moved quietly between shelves until she could see the titles. Agricultural reports. Harvest forecasts. Irrigation plans. She blinked. Again. Surely she was looking at the wrong table. This was the Alpha King. The man from countless frightening stories. Why was he spending his morning studying crop yields? Adrian looked up suddenly. Their eyes met across the room. Evelyn froze. For the second time in 2 days she had been caught staring. A smile touched his face. Not mocking. Not annoyed. Just amused. "Good morning, Evelyn," he said. The sound of her name startled her more than anything else. She had never told him her name. Somehow, despite ruling an entire territory and managing endless responsibilities, the Alpha King had remembered the nervous servant who got lost on her first day. And for reasons she could not explain, that simple fact stayed with her long after she left the library. By the end of her first week, Evelyn had reached a troubling conclusion. She was either becoming a terrible spy, or Adrian Blackwood was making the job impossible. Every time she attempted to quietly observe him, something unexpected happened. On Tuesday she found him in the palace greenhouse helping an elderly gardener replant winter herbs. On Wednesday she spotted him carrying a stack of reports through a corridor, because he refused to interrupt busy servants. On Thursday she discovered him sitting beneath a maple tree in the eastern courtyard, while 3 palace children excitedly showed him drawings they had made with colored charcoal. None of it fit the image she had been sent to investigate. The king was supposed to be distant, untouchable. Instead, he seemed to appear everywhere ordinary life existed. The worst part was that he kept finding her. One afternoon Evelyn slipped into the library intending to search for records related to trade agreements. The information might actually be useful for her mission. She selected a ladder, climbed several feet up a shelf, and began scanning book titles. A few minutes later a familiar voice drifted upward from below. "I was wondering when I would find you here." Evelyn nearly dropped the book in her hands. Looking down, she found Adrian standing at the bottom of the ladder with an expression of mild amusement. "Your Majesty," she said. "Should I stop being surprised to see you?" "Probably," he replied. "You seem to have a talent for appearing in places I frequent." She almost laughed at the irony. If only he knew the real reason. Another day she crossed the palace courtyard carrying folded linens. Rain clouds gathered overhead, turning the sky silver gray. Before she could reach shelter, the storm arrived. Large drops splashed against stone pathways. Servants scattered in every direction. Evelyn hurried toward an archway only to discover Adrian already standing there watching the rain. "Caught by surprise?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. For several quiet moments they listened to the steady rhythm of rainfall. The scent of wet earth drifted through the air. Somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled softly. It should have felt awkward standing beside a king. Instead it felt strangely comfortable, as if silence itself became easier around him. "Do you miss home?" Adrian asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. Very few people had asked what she felt since arriving. "Sometimes," she answered honestly. "Mostly I miss knowing where I belong." His gaze remained fixed on the rain. "I understand that more than you think." The answer lingered with her long after the storm ended. Kings were not supposed to sound lonely, yet loneliness seemed to follow him like a shadow nobody else noticed. That evening Evelyn sat at her desk preparing another report for Silver Creek. The page remained blank for nearly 10 minutes. Eventually she wrote a single sentence. The Alpha King continues to exceed expectations. She stared at the words, then slowly crossed them out. They sounded too personal, too sincere. Instead she filled the report with harmless observations about schedules and meetings. Facts without meaning. Details without truth. When she finally sealed the letter, unease settled deep in her chest. Because for the first time since accepting the mission, Evelyn realized she was not protecting herself from Adrian Blackwood. She was protecting Adrian Blackwood from the people who had sent her. The first letter arrived on a cold Monday morning. Evelyn recognized the seal immediately. Silver Creek. Her stomach tightened before she even opened it. She carried the envelope to a quiet corner behind the kitchen pantry and carefully unfolded the paper. The message was short, direct, uncomfortable. Progress report required. Details requested regarding council activity, military planning, and royal vulnerabilities. Deliver useful intelligence immediately. No greeting. No concern for her well-being. No question about whether she was safe. Just the mission. Evelyn read the note twice before folding it again. For several minutes she stared at the stone wall in front of her. When she had left Silver Creek, everything seemed simple. The king was supposed to be a threat. She was supposed to uncover evidence. Instead, every day brought another contradiction. That afternoon she found herself carrying fresh records to the administrative wing. The palace bustled with activity. Advisors moved between meetings. Messengers hurried through corridors. Yet despite all the movement, Adrian seemed remarkably easy to locate. He was standing near an open balcony speaking with a young courier whose hands shook so badly that several papers slipped from his grasp. Evelyn watched from a distance as the documents scattered across the floor. The courier immediately looked horrified. The mistake clearly embarrassed him. But instead of showing frustration, Adrian knelt to help collect the papers. He handed them back one by one. Whatever he said next caused the young man to visibly relax. Moments later the courier left smiling. Evelyn remained where she was, watching, thinking. Nobody was performing for her. Nobody knew she was observing. These moments were real, and they happened constantly. Later that evening she sat at her desk preparing another report. Her pen moved slowly. She described schedules, public appearances, routine meetings. Nothing important, nothing dangerous, nothing that could be used against him. Several times she paused and considered writing the truth. The truth was that Adrian worked longer hours than anyone else in the palace. The truth was that servants trusted him. The truth was that children ran toward him instead of away from him. But somehow those facts felt more personal than political. She left them out. The next morning brought another surprise. Martha assigned Evelyn to help organize deliveries for several nearby villages. Curious, she examined the records while sorting paperwork. The figures immediately caught her attention. Large shipments of grain, winter blankets, medical supplies. Entire wagon loads headed toward smaller packs struggling through a difficult season. Evelyn checked the destination names twice. One of them was only 30 miles from Silver Creek. Why is the palace sending all of this? She asked. Martha glanced up from her work. The king ordered it. For free. Martha looked genuinely confused by the question. Of course. Evelyn stared at the inventory sheets. Silver Creek leadership had spent years describing Adrian Blackwood as selfish and power-hungry. Yet these records showed resources flowing outward, not inward, helping communities that offered little in return. The realization unsettled her. That evening she wandered into the palace gardens trying to clear her head. The sky glowed orange and gold as sunset settled across the horizon. She followed a stone pathway lined with lanterns until she spotted Adrian sitting alone on a bench overlooking a small pond. He appeared tired, more tired than she had ever seen him. For a moment she considered turning around. Before she could, he looked up. Evelyn. Her name again. Always her name. As though she mattered enough to remember. Your Majesty. Adrian smiled faintly. You look troubled. The words caught her off guard because they were true. She was troubled. Not by him. By herself. By the growing weight of every report she had altered. by every truth she had hidden, by the fact that the mission no longer felt like loyalty, felt like betrayal. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Palace, Evelyn realized she dreaded the day Silver Creek demanded more than words. 3 days later, everything changed because of a missing ledger. Evelyn had been helping organize supply records in the administrative archives when she noticed a stack of documents marked for village distribution. Normally she would have ignored them. Her assignment was to watch the king, not count shipments. But one familiar name caught her attention. Silver Creek. Her heart skipped. She pulled the file closer and carefully opened it. Inside were months of records, dates, quantities, delivery routes, signatures. At first she assumed there had to be some mistake. Then she checked it. Second ledger. A third. The numbers matched perfectly. For nearly 2 years, Blackwood Palace had quietly provided grain, medicine, tools, and winter supplies to Silver Creek Pack. Not once. Not occasionally. Consistently. Every month. Evelyn stared at the pages in disbelief. The room suddenly felt too small. According to everything she had been told growing up, Adrian Blackwood had neglected smaller packs. Leaders back home constantly blamed him for shortages and hardships. Yet the records in front of her proved the opposite. The king had been helping them all along. She turned another page. A letter had been attached to one shipment report. The handwriting belonged to a regional governor. The message thanked the crown for continuing support despite repeated refusals from local pack leadership to publicly acknowledge the assistance. Evelyn read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Refusals to acknowledge the assistance. A cold realization settled over her. The truth had never been hidden from the kingdom. It had been hidden from her. Hidden from ordinary members of Silver Creek. Hidden by the very people who had sent her here. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Startled, Evelyn quickly closed the ledger. A moment later Adrian entered carrying several folders beneath one arm. He stopped when he saw her standing among the archive shelves. "There you are," he said. "Martha has been looking for you for 20 minutes. Normally she would have laughed. Normally she would have made some awkward excuse. This time she simply stared at him. Adrian frowned slightly. Evelyn. She wanted to ask 100 questions. Why had he helped her pack? Why had nobody mentioned it? Why did every story she grew up hearing seem to be unraveling one thread at a time? Instead she managed only one question. "Do you ever get tired?" Adrian looked genuinely confused. Of what? Of helping people who do not appreciate it. Silence lingered between them. Sunlight filtered through the archive windows. Dust drifted through the air like tiny golden sparks. Adrian considered the question carefully before answering. Sometimes. His voice remained calm. Honest. But leadership is not about receiving gratitude. It is about responsibility. The words landed harder than she expected, because he was not trying to impress anyone. He did not know what she had discovered. He did not know every belief she carried was collapsing around her. He was simply telling the truth. Later that night Evelyn sat alone in her room with the Silver Creek record spread across her desk. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Her mission had begun with a lie. Not a lie from Adrian Blackwood. A lie from the people she trusted most. Outside her window, the palace lights glowed softly against the darkness. Somewhere beyond those walls, the king was probably still working long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Evelyn lowered her gaze to the unfinished report waiting beside her. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Palace, she no longer wondered whether she could continue deceiving Adrian. She wondered whether she could ever trust Silver Creek again. The message arrived at dawn. Unlike the previous letters from Silver Creek, this one carried a different seal. Evelyn recognized it immediately. The mark belonged to the Pack Council itself. Her hands felt cold as she broke the wax and unfolded the paper. The instructions were simple. Too simple. Attend the Royal Strategy Gathering scheduled for Friday evening. Record every discussion. Deliver names, plans, and routes. Failure is not an option. Evelyn read the words again and again. This was no longer a request for observations. They wanted confidential information. Information that could harm the people who trusted her. Information that Adrian trusted his advisors to protect. For several minutes she sat motionless on the edge of her bed. Then she folded the letter and placed it into the fireplace. The paper curled as flames consumed it. By breakfast she had made her decision. She would not do it. The relief lasted less than 12 hours. Late that afternoon, while delivering records to the Western Office Wing, she noticed unusual activity near the administrative entrance. Several palace guards stood quietly outside a conference room. Advisors moved in and out carrying folders. Something important was happening. Evelyn lowered her head and continued walking. She wanted no part of it. Unfortunately, fate seemed determined to test her. As she passed an open doorway, a familiar voice called her name. Evelyn. She stopped. Adrian stood inside the room beside a long table covered with maps. Several council members occupied nearby seats. "Would you bring these reports to the archive after the meeting?" he asked. He handed her a stack of documents without hesitation, without suspicion, without fear. Trust. The simple trust in that gesture struck harder than any accusation could have. "Of course, Your Majesty," she answered quietly. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. Evelyn remained outside organizing paperwork while waiting. Through the partially open doorway she occasionally caught glimpses of discussion. Agricultural concerns. Trade agreements. Winter preparations. Nothing secretive. Nothing threatening. Just people trying to manage an entire kingdom responsibly. Yet every passing minute increased the pressure building inside her chest. Silver Creek wanted information. Adrian continued giving her reasons not to provide it. When the meeting finally ended, advisors filed into the hallway. Evelyn stepped forward to collect the reports. That was when she noticed one folder lying forgotten beneath a chair. She bent down and picked it up. Before she could return it, another hand reached for the same folder. Lord Marcus Hawthorne, one of the senior council advisors. His expression remained polite. Too polite. "Interesting coincidence," he said. Evelyn froze. Something in his voice felt wrong. "I was just returning it," she replied. "I am sure you were." For a brief moment his gaze lingered on her face. Studying. Measuring. Then he accepted the folder and walked away. The encounter lasted only seconds. Yet unease settled heavily over her. That evening the feeling worsened. Conversations stopped when she entered certain rooms. A few servants avoided eye contact. Even Martha seemed distracted. By nightfall, Evelyn could no longer ignore the growing tension. Someone knew something. She just did not know who. Or how much. The answer arrived shortly before midnight. A knock sounded at her door. Expecting Martha, she opened it immediately. Instead she found two royal guards standing in the corridor. Their expressions were calm but serious. "Miss Carter," one said respectfully, "you are requested in the council chamber." Requested. Not arrested. Not accused. Yet fear swept through her all the same. Because deep down Evelyn already understood. The secret she had carried into Blackwood Palace was no longer hers alone. And somewhere beyond the dark hallway, a conversation was waiting that would change everything. The walk to the council chamber felt much longer than it actually was. Every footstep echoed through the quiet hallways. Every turn seemed to tighten the knot in Evelyn's chest. The two guards remained respectful, saying nothing as they escorted her through the palace. That silence frightened her more than anger would have. By the time they reached the chamber doors, she already knew there was no point pretending anymore. The truth had finally caught up with her. One guard pushed open the door. Warm light spilled across the polished floor. Several council members occupied seats around the long oak table. Lord Marcus Hawthorne stood near the windows. And at the far end of the room sat Adrian Blackwood. For a moment Evelyn could not look at anyone except him. His expression was calm. Not cold. Not hostile. Somehow that made everything harder. "Thank you for coming," Adrian said quietly. The guards withdrew, closing the doors behind her. Silence settled over the room. Lord Marcus stepped forward first. "Miss Carter," he began, "would you care to explain why messages intended for Silver Creek Pack have been leaving palace grounds under false identities?" Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. There it was. No accusation. No dramatic reveal. Just facts. Simple and impossible to deny. She lowered her eyes. "I can explain." Then explain, Marcus replied. For several seconds she could not find the words. Weeks of secrets, lies, and half-truths tangled together inside her mind. Finally she spoke. She told them everything. How Silver Creek had recruited her. How she had arrived under false pretenses. How she had been instructed to gather information. How every report she sent became less truthful because the reality she found inside Blackwood Palace never matched the stories she had been told. Nobody interrupted. Nobody raised their voice. The room remained completely still. When she finally finished, the silence felt even heavier than before. Evelyn gathered every ounce of courage she had left and looked directly at Adrian. I am sorry, she whispered. For all of it. His gray eyes held hers for a long moment. The disappointment she saw there hurt far more than anger ever could. Did you ever intend to tell me? He asked. The question landed with painful honesty. Evelyn opened her mouth and then stopped, because she did not know the answer. First, no. Later, maybe. Recently, almost certainly. But intentions were meaningless compared to actions. I should have, she admitted. Adrian looked away. The simple movement felt like a door quietly closing. Before anyone could speak again, another advisor hurried into the chamber carrying several documents. His expression appeared unusually tense. Your Majesty, he said. You need to see this immediately. Adrian accepted the papers. As he read, his expression changed. Not with fear. With concern. Lord Marcus moved closer. What happened? The supply caravans heading north were diverted this morning, Adrian answered. Several villages expecting winter deliveries may not receive them on time. Evelyn felt her heart sink. Those villages depended on those shipments. She knew that now. She had seen the records herself. Adrian immediately rose from his chair. Every trace of the earlier conversation seemed secondary compared to the problem in front of him. Send messages to the regional governors, he instructed. We will reroute reserves from the eastern warehouses. The advisors quickly moved into action. Maps appeared. Reports changed hands. Plans formed. Through it all, nobody paid attention to Evelyn anymore. Yet standing there, watching Adrian focus entirely on protecting people who would never know his efforts, she suddenly understood something important. The greatest proof of his character had arrived on the worst night of her life. Even after discovering her betrayal, his first concern was still the welfare of others. And in that moment, Evelyn realized losing his trust hurt because somewhere along the way, his trust had become the one thing she valued most. The following week passed in a blur of uncertainty. Evelyn remained at Blackwood Palace, but everything felt different. Nobody accused her. Nobody escorted her away. Yet the easy rhythm she had once shared with Adrian seemed gone. Their paths crossed less often. Conversations became shorter. Polite. Careful. The distance hurt more than she expected. One crisp autumn morning, Martha handed Evelyn a small wooden box. This arrived for you, she said. Evelyn frowned. Nobody outside the palace should have known where to send gifts. She carried the box to a quiet bench in the garden and slowly opened the lid. Inside sat 3 honey cakes. Perfectly golden. Freshly baked. For several seconds she simply stared. Beneath the pastries rested a folded note. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The message contained only one sentence. Some mistakes deserve honesty, not exile. Evelyn read the words again and again. There was no signature. None was necessary. She knew exactly who had written them. Later that afternoon, palace bells rang throughout the grounds. Servants gathered near the central courtyard. Advisors arrived from every wing of the palace. Curious whispers spread through the crowd. Evelyn followed the others until she reached the stone plaza at the heart of the estate. Adrian stood near the fountain speaking with regional leaders. The diverted supply caravans had been recovered. Emergency shipments had reached every village before the first winter storms. Relief swept through the crowd. Smiles replaced worry. Conversations filled the air. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt herself breathe normally again. Then Adrian's gaze found hers across the courtyard. The noise around them seemed to fade. Slowly, he crossed the distance between them. Dozens of people watched. Advisors. Servants. Guards. The same people who now knew exactly who Evelyn was and why she had come. Her pulse quickened. Adrian stopped in front of her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he asked the question she had feared and hoped for at the same time. Was any of it real? The courtyard grew quiet. Evelyn understood what he meant. Not the reports. Not the mission. Not the lies. Everything that came after. The conversations during rainstorms. The afternoons in the library. The shared laughter. The concern. The friendship. She met his eyes. The mission was not, she said softly. But my feelings were. Emotion flickered across Adrian's face. Relief. Sadness. Understanding. Perhaps all three. Then, to the surprise of everyone watching, he smiled. Not the polite smile of a king addressing a subject. The genuine smile she had first seen in the council chamber weeks ago. Good, he said. Because mine were too. A collective murmur swept through the courtyard. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. Not from sadness. From release. From finally standing in the truth. Adrian glanced toward the wooden box still tucked beneath her arm. How were the honey cakes? He asked. A laugh escaped before she could stop it. Dangerously effective. His smile widened. Around them the tension dissolved completely. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Palace, Evelyn no longer felt like an outsider looking in. She felt seen. Accepted. Chosen not because she had been perfect but because she had found the courage to be honest. As the autumn sunlight settled across the courtyard and the palace bells echoed once more through the kingdom, Evelyn realized the mission that brought her here had ended long ago. What remained was something far better. A future built not on secrets but on trust. And somewhere nearby, the scent of honey and cinnamon drifted through the air, reminding her that sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that change everything.